Good. We get to start with a laugh this way. Welcome to the
Yay!
program, Ginna. So good to have you here. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I love seeing you. We used to talk on the phone all the time, so it's like cool to see your face and
I
do
know it's
that
fun, and
here.
that was I like I was telling you before. My guilty pleasure with the show is not only getting to tell stories all the time, but
Hmm.
with people that I've known for some years now. Like
Hmm.
I really get insight into like things that you just don't ask these questions, and some of that's because of quarantine, some of that's because of the podcast, and it's just kind of a fun way to learn more about people. Uh,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, so I'm so glad to have you. Hope
Hmm.
you're excited to be here and
I'm super
tell.
excited. Yeah, I love it. I've been looking forward to it. I've been like imagining it in my head. I'm like, oh, Thursday's coming.
Okay, so what did you imagine? What did you imagine the show to be?
I had no idea. Because I knew the name, so I knew I was going to be talking about some experiences I've had. But so that was actually creating some anxiety for me. But then you're
Okay.
easy to talk to, so.
Right. So, I mean, I remember our first conversation, and
Mhm.
I've grilled you about this enough. But what paint me the picture? How do you remember meeting me? Because I remember meeting you.
Okay, so we went to grad school together at Goddard, and we're just sort of thrown into a room together. And I think I arrived late, so everyone I had already met. And I was just this big ball of nerves, and I was probably just like chatty and hyper. And I remember you just asked me, I don't even remember like how we started talking, but I think you were telling me about where you were from and your family or something. And I was like really missing my kids because it was the first time I've been away for them, really, because they were really young. It's like maybe 4 and 6, possibly, maybe a little bit
Yeah,
younger than that. So
they were. I think that sounds about right. And yeah,
yeah,
and just for the people who are listening or watching, this is the first time you had been away from your kids for at this point about
yeah,
two hours,
yeah.
maybe two and a half.
So I was talking to you about, I
Yeah.
think I asked you if you have kids. I asked you if you have
Yes.
kids, and I
Yeah.
wanted to connect to somebody through my
Yeah.
kids.
Right.
So yeah.
Whereas like what I recall at Goddard, and not to say that they weren't great mothers, but everyone was, or many people were very excited to have this week where they kind of
Mm,
got a little reprieve, and it was like, but you know, we had a good time. So
yeah. I mean,
um,
that's a big part. I'm very much, I love kids. I love being a mom. I love it. It's like what makes me feel the most joy. So I always want to be with them.
well, that's amazing, and I have a feeling that we will probably end up connecting that as we get through some of the like your history and then growing up, and then
Yeah.
some of the trauma. That then again, clearly, you're getting a lot of joy just
Hmm.
with your kids, because that was one of the first things I knew about you, and the second thing is the evolution of how you became the dark fairy that you are today.
Yeah.
So let's start from the origins. Where is Ginna originally from? What was her family like?
I grew up in Spokane, Washington, so it's a small Eastern Washington town. It's pretty conservative. My family was very liberal, but we grew up in a really conservative Christian environment. I'm not Christian, nor have I ever been religious. I went to public schools. I have a twin brother. I have one older sister. So
Are you and your twin brother like? Are you hardcore twins?
no,
No.
we're just siblings, like, I mean, I don't know what you mean by hardcore twins, but I think you mean that we like have some sort of like secret language and we understand each other's, we can like
Yeah.
finish each other's sentences and whatever, but no, we're not like that. We're very, very different. Other than
Mm.
that, we're both like siblings and we grew up with the same family. So
Right, because like I have a vague recollection that you have a twin, but I
mhm.
feel like people who, for instance, the kid, your presence with your kids is so strong that like, that's right there. But when some people
Mhm.
have a twin, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a twin, and every
Yeah.
the twinness is like a huge element. Okay,
Yeah.
um, so then we like growing up, my interest, because we're both writers, different types, but both writers, is where that interest started,
Mhm.
if it was young,
Mhm.
and and also like, was your childhood pretty easy, pretty tough? How was
Mhm.
school? What?
Mhm. Um, I had a pretty wonderful childhood. I had a really supportive mother. My parents were divorced, and I didn't have a great relationship with my father. He was sort of not around as much. I went to public schools, and I think that's probably where my first traumatic experience occurred, or at least that I can remember. Um, Beyond just my parents separating, but I was dyslexic, and I didn't know, and the school system didn't know, and so it was really hard for me to learn. And I think there's this common misperception that dyslexia is typically just reading and writing. In my case, it's a processing disorder. So it was directly related to how I processed information, how information came in, and then what happened to it, and then how I was able to express myself. And so, as you can imagine, in public school, a lot of how kids are taught is through listening, taking in the information, regurgitating it. And this was not possible for me. Like it required 10 times more work than what somebody without the disability could do. So from a very early age, I felt that I was not smart. And this was reinforced in test taking, in grades, in school performances. And also, I have a brother who's like straight A student. He's my twin brother, straight A student, like valedictorian of high school, So I had these sort of experiences where I didn't know how to function.
Right.
So I think that sort of set me up for having this really unhealthy relationship with my emotions, because I wasn't.
How so?
Um, so I think because nobody was able to really understand that there was a problem, or that I had an issue with learning and processing.
Mm-hmm.
I was placed constantly every single day into situations that were not only uncomfortable, but were like caused me a ton of anxiety, like having like a lot of, so it was really impossible for me to absorb any sort of information while I was in school. And so I began thinking poorly about who I was as a person, and who I was. At my ability academically became my how I related to myself internally.
Mm-hmm.
I very much internalized all of the test scores, all of the negative remarks from teachers. It all became my reality and how I thought of who I was. And nobody understood this, and nobody talked about it. There was
And
no conversation. So,
okay. And yeah, well, that's really, really hard, especially like starting at a young age from, being conditioned that way.
yeah.
Um, I'm curious, was there an area either in school or out of school, athletically or whatever, that
Hmm.
you found like some reprieve? Like, did you have
Yes.
some good friend, like
Hmm.
what was because that sounds like a lot of negative thinking. You're not,
Yeah.
I know now, and that makes sense, um, I know you're not a negative person. You're a pretty
Hmm.
pragmatic person from what I know.
Yeah.
And curious, what was the balance of that like growing up as a kid, if there was any,
Hmm. Well,
Uh,
one, I did learn how to compensate, and I did okay in school at some points,
nice.
like, um, I was never really able to do math very well, because understanding formulas and generating, regurgitating information that in like a mathematical way wasn't really how my brain worked. But I was also always creative, and I grew up in a family that really valued art and
Hmm.
creativity and expressing yourself through art. And so, although I was not immediately drawn to that, I was actually a very physical kid. And so where I was shining as a kid was through my physicality. And that became a really important element of my childhood was sports. And that's where I got most of the positive reinforcement through coaches and
Nice.
through
What
teammates.
sports?
I played volleyball. So
Nice. Yeah.
So I played volleyball from the time, I played softball and basketball and all of those sports. And I'm not your typical jock. Like, I'm probably far from that, but I am actually very competitive, and I'm also very physical and just have a natural ability in sports.
Yeah.
And so I had coaches like wanting me to be on their team, and I had people being very relying on me, and it felt
nice.
Yeah. So I think that's where I gained a lot of confidence and support from a community of people and friends. And then I got really heavily into playing volleyball, and I had a good group of friends.
Yeah, you're built like a volleyball player.
Yeah.
We could use you down here in LA for when we start playing again with these old Jewish guys. We play on Sundays on the sand. Well, it's on the sand, so you don't get hurt if you fall. It's really nice.
So I haven't played volleyball forever, but
it's okay. We're not that good. Well, okay, cool. So, all right. So you've got kind of two balances in your world, and it seems like maybe one, or just your own personal desire, was kind of keeping you well. Did you sort of have a moment where you decided not to let this dyslexia or this processing issue get in your way? Like, was there like a change, or were you just that way?
So I didn't actually know I had dyslexia until my son was diagnosed, and he's 15.
Wow.
And then he started having all the similar issues that I had in school, and he got tested and had 3 different types of dyslexia. So I've actually never been tested, but because he has it and his experience is so similar to mine, I can be almost positive that I have it. My dad's dyslexic, my sister's dyslexic. Okay. So we all, so I don't know. I don't know why people were like, "Oh, you're dyslexic too," but it just didn't occur to people or something. So I actually was tested in high school, and I think I had learned to compensate so well that once I did take a test I don't know, it's some sort of IQ test. I don't even know. It's like shapes and stuff. And anyway, they couldn't determine what type of disability I had, but they did say I had a disability, but they didn't know what it was. And to me at that time, I was like, oh, that just means I'm stupid. They don't want to say that I'm stupid. Wow. Yeah. So they're telling me, okay, you have a learning disability, but we don't know what to call it. So I'm just like, oh, you just don't want to say I'm stupid. So that became my reality. So I just wanted to shut down the disability thing and be like, I don't even want to talk about it. I'm just going to manage my life as if I don't have it. And that became a way for me.
Because what I also noticed earlier is that you said I was dyslexic, not I am dyslexic.
Oh, I am. No, I am. Yeah. No, it doesn't go away.
Well, no, but to me, even the fact that you kind of formulated it that way was at least like, it's almost like it affected you. It probably does affect you. Yeah. But you never really let it also prevent you from achieving, I think, the things that like you set out specifically with writing, which is pretty cool. And I do, kind of knowing a little bit that I know about your life, as I zoom out as a writer myself, and I think about the kind of like insane dramatic irony that exists in our setup of where both of these sort of traumas lie, both physically and then, writing related is, well, if God or whatever, the force of nature doesn't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, I know. That's it. I am a very pragmatic person, and I'm also sort of a realist. So I'm just like, no, that shit's not, or whatever. I don't know if I can swear on this. At this
point, we've had, there's been episodes that there's no return. It's all good.
Yeah. So I do definitely feel like it's completely ironic. And, I can trace it back and try to understand why things happened the way that they did. And I have multiple times, but everything was so long ago. It's hard to really determine why things are why they are, So.
I have kind of an obnoxious theory on that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, what I would call a pragmatic formula for it, which is just like, it's almost impossible to really know why something happened to you, especially if
Yeah.
it's like a force of, like, if you didn't drink some sort of a poison or some sort of a mutation device that caused something, and it just
Mm-hmm.
happened to you, then trying to figure out why or who or how is, like, in most cases I find, like, going to lead you down a path that's, like, probably more destructive than constructive. When,
Yeah.
when the real question is, okay, this did happen, and this
Mm-hmm.
does hurt, or this does suck, or this does
Mm-hmm.
challenge things, but then it's like, what am I gonna do? Like,
Yeah. I think
and
that's important. Yeah. I
yeah.
guess for me, I really did need both. I needed to have the cathartic experiences of
Mm-hmm.
being able to go back to my past and really deconstruct it and understand, um, and be heard. And then
Right.
also being able to understand that is the past. And now I have to create and reconstruct the present and then the future. And so then with a foot in the past, I can then pull forward into a newer, better
Hmm.
place. So,
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, I agree with that. I think
mm-hmm.
that's a good, like, amendment, because, and I think you need to use what happened to
Mm-hmm.
bring you forward, because I
Yeah.
think that the pain that you feel, which is real, um, needs to be channeled, and especially as creative person or whatever, like, it can, or as a person who cares about doing good things or whatever, like, that pain exists because something was really important or good to you.
Yeah.
If you didn't care about this
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be upset. So if you care
Yeah.
about it, it means it's important. So if it's
Mm-hmm.
important, the fact that you're no longer able to do it the same way, more often than not, means you need to then understand, like, well then what,
Mm-hmm.
what is this going to come do for me? I don't know. That's, otherwise,
Yeah.
man, I get dizzy trying to figure some things out, because I'm an overthinker,
Yeah.
um,
I a little side note, my husband's
yeah,
like, I don't know
yeah.
Zach. He seems like a go-doer type. I can't remember exactly what he said, but like a hustler. That's what he said. He's a hustler. I think he is kind of a hustler.
Well,
Yeah.
and this was a response to, like, I personally was getting just upset with the fact that it felt like, at first we had an opportunity with quarantine and all this to actually see each other as human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe dissolve some of the things that have been historically and presently dividing us.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not all, and it was like, the only thing I could really think about doing that I'm actually good at is telling stories, beyond teaching and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
but I don't want it to be about the things that divide us right now, because we have so much of
Yeah.
that. And like, the more, again, I talk to people of all types and all backgrounds, it's like, it's just amazing. Like, we really are, you know, we can come up with the same ideas and the same feelings, and we need to, like, do more of that. And it's the one thing I can do. So you can call it a hustle, but it's just,
Yeah.
I like to do things when I feel like this crazy urge. So,
Yeah, no, I agree with
um,
you, Zach. I do think we need to bring people together during this time. I think that's ultimately anybody who's gone through trauma knows that the way to feel whole again, to have peace with the trauma that you've had, is to have relationships and connections that are
yeah.
positive.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
that like, having positive networking aspects, like, not just for work, but for actual
Hmm.
life,
And
is super
now
critical.
I feel like so many people are having to be at home and deal with this trauma of COVID, or the
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter or whatever it is, alone, because they're at home and they don't have that social engagement, and then they have to deal with their inner demons or whatever alone in their house, and that's not always the best
Yeah,
place to
that's
be.
that's
Yeah.
my one of my concerns been, is like the ripple effects of how this is, you've got kids, I teach kids, and it's like, where is this going to all lead long term? Because we really need to be with people,
Yeah.
and because otherwise we start to forget who we are, more and more.
Yes. Yeah.
And but anyway, so now that's a good segue for, for part two of this. So we've got, you found ways to overcome by a little bit of dissociation, but I
Yeah.
would
A lot
consider
of
it,
dissociation, to
but
be
I would
honest.
consider it,
Yeah.
I guess, but okay, I guess I was trying to underplay it because I didn't want the stigma of it to be like a negative. I don't think what
Mhm.
you did was a negative thing. I think,
Mhm.
you know, because it wasn't destructive. Some people dissociate and then use that as a way to,
Well, okay. I
oh,
mean, I do agree, but I do think it was destructive for me because I also, at the same time, when I was disassociating from my learning issues in school, I began coping with that through exercise and monitoring my eating. And so an eating
okay,
disorder developed.
okay,
So it always, if you can find a good coping mechanism along with, being able to plow forward, then that's helpful. But my coping mechanism became destructive.
okay,
And
so right, so that's, yeah, and I think that's probably common, because I think there's a lot of trial and error in trying to figure this stuff out. If there isn't, it wouldn't be difficult. We wouldn't all
yeah.
make mistakes. We'd like, oh, that was a mistake. I better get out of it,
Hmm.
But we don't even realize, I think, how conditioned we are sometimes, in our own thoughts or feelings, and it's hard, especially when you're young. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so then I I guess, like, in addition to your love for kids, the other thing that stood out to me immediately, um, was, and your writing was quite bold, when I remember, like,
Hmm.
versus your physical human voice can be quite soft, and then
Yeah.
when you read it, it's sort of like whoa, um, and which is amazing,
Hmm.
and but beyond that was, another sort of physical ailment outlier, which
Hmm.
was that you had Lyme's disease.
Well, actually, I have to say that we haven't been able to figure out if it's Lyme. So we definitely know I have chronic fatigue. So I'm not,
What is
yeah.
with you and undiagnosable,
Yeah, I
you
know.
know
So I do feel like that's like the story of my life. We can't figure out what's wrong with you. Yeah.
and interesting. So okay, so when did that when, I guess, did that moment, when did the life shift where that occurred?
Okay, so
Um,
I had an eating disorder from the time I was about 16 until in my early, like 30 or so. And but when I was about 26, I started experiencing some strange physical ailments and then a crashing fatigue that lasted for months and months.
hmm,
I went to all different doctors. I was really young. I was sort of in my prime, and I ended up recovering after 6 months. But because of that, I guess in comparison to other people's experience, that was sort of a fast recovery. I didn't actually deal with the issues in that had created that experience for me, or that illness for me. And so at 30, after my second baby was born, I think maybe 30, I think, I had another major collapse, I call it, because there's like really no other way to say it. I was home alone with my 1-year-old, and all of a sudden I couldn't feel my hands and my arms all the way up to my elbows. And then I couldn't stand up without feeling, I now know that I was having a panic attack for some reason. I was just,
yeah.
and I felt like my heart was just like gonna be like exploding out of my chest, and I couldn't really
Mm,
move. And somehow I made it upstairs, and I called 911 because I thought I was dying.
jeez.
And so then they came, and by the time they got here, I had recovered from this panic attack I was having. And they're like, "Oh, you're fine. Call your husband, have him come home, and go to the doctor tomorrow," and stuff like that. And then, so that sort of set me on the path of like, okay, your body's your body isn't functioning well. I hadn't been sleeping. I had a 1-year-old. I had a
Mm-hmm.
3-year-old too. So that's where chronic fatigue really, really came and hit me in like a ton of bricks.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
your body was just very like
So,
deteriorated, and
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And
And
then I did have this deterioration of the physical appearance as well. I lost like 15 pounds, and I wasn't actually engaging in so much of an eating disorder at that point, because I was eating well and eating more, but I just couldn't put on weight. I was just getting
right.
thinner and thinner and thinner. And yeah, so.
Yeah, so my brother who has Crohn's, I think he dramatically lost weight as well, like in high
Mhm,
school. And I think that's sort of what tipped it off.
mhm,
But interesting. And so curious to know, um, when you talk about the eating disorder, was it like that you weren't eating at all pretty
mhm.
much, or is that you were eating and expelling, or was it a
I
combination?
was more anorexic, so I
Yeah,
wouldn't eat at all, and then I would
yeah.
exercise a lot.
Wow.
So I would like go running, go on the walks. Um,
What does not eating at all entail? Because I know some people
so it would
actually
be
fast
like
for a
I would
long
have a couple bites of like of like a cinnamon roll for breakfast,
time.
and then maybe I would eat like a couple bites of like I sometimes have like a peach, or there was like safe foods that I could have. And it was just a constant thing. I thought about it from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed. What my body felt like, if I felt fat, what I was going to eat, when I was going to exercise. If I couldn't exercise, it was a really anxiety ridden thing for me. I would have uh, just bad thoughts about myself, that I was going to be fat. I know it's all untrue, but in my
Right.
mind, I thought I would just instantly become this fat slob if I didn't exercise.
Right.
So,
And was there kind of a moment where you were like about to eat something and then you were like, no, I'm not going to do this. Like,
it was more that I would this overwhelming sense of shame would come, and it's not like I had that much control over my my actions. But what really was apparent is that there was just a constant voice in my head telling me that I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, I'm whatever it
hmm,
is. Yeah, so that was
right.
sort of where that was just sort of like this little demon on my shoulder or whatever, 24/7. From the moment I woke up until I went to bed, it was there.
It is extremely sad that for whatever reason, like just teenage girls like have this like burden to carry on themselves when it comes to body image or just bodies
Mhm.
in general, that like just seems to be, I mean, it's just a sad thing, because like the amount of
Mhm.
people I know who have gone through similar type things, not but yours may have been triggered more because you felt really inadequate and in the classroom
Mhm.
or whatever, but
Yeah.
like that was sort of giving you the negative thoughts. But for
Mhm.
some people it's like it's just out of the blue, and not some, like many, and
Mhm.
it's I don't know, it's
Yeah, I
sad.
really think, I mean, I believe that a lot of why we as women have issues with our bodies is because in the media we are portrayed as young and beautiful and skinny, and that is what is modeled.
Right.
Yeah, so I
Oh yeah,
have,
no, imagery
yeah,
is a huge thing.
and plus it's very well, women's worth comes a lot from her beauty in our society. So who do we respect in our society? It's the movie stars. It's
Yeah.
not the you know intelligent, um, career driven women in our culture that are there. It's the beautiful, you know blonde, blue eyed movie stars or whatever. So
Yeah,
there's
I
a.
think, Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's slowly shifting a little bit, or at least there's like
Hmm.
a very intentional drive to shift. But yeah, it takes a lot. I mean, it's taking a long time to shake off the shackles of a lot of old residual cultural, you know,
Yeah, and I think even
norms.
being, I think I think being a vivid emotional person, it's really hard to not internalize
Yeah.
what we see in our culture. And that
Hmm.
was my experience because my sister is very similar to me and had the same upbringing, same
Yeah.
experience in school, and she didn't internalize it. And she could sort of move on and be like, oh, it doesn't matter that I failed that test or whatever. Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
like,
Well, yeah.
there's
No.
a personality that
Yeah.
is really geared toward falling down these dark and deep, tunnels where it's hard to pull yourself back up. And I think that personality is one of extreme sensitivity and, you know, this feeling that you can't express yourself.
Yeah. And so, okay. So when you kind of going back to your literal collapse, was there, other than like your physical fatigue at that point, was there like another mental or stress,
Hmm.
anxiety related thing that you had maybe been simmering on? Because, like you said, you'd sort of been healthier at that point.
Hmm.
You've got your second kid, I think,
Yeah, well,
and
I think
then
that was the stress and anxiety of just being a new mom. I think sort of tipped me over into into the
so
poor
what
health.
are some of those thoughts like? I'm not a mom,
Hmm.
like what do they feel like, or what did they feel like?
For me, at least, it's just, I mean, you know how much I love my kids, and every
Hmm.
mom, every parent does. I think also part of my personality is when I do have uh, a desire to do something, I'm like 110% into that thing.
Yeah.
And it was my kids. And so everything I did, every thought I had,
Mm.
I have I was obsessive about them. And so that ended up not being a healthy thing
Mm.
completely. I mean, the love that they received was healthy, but like
Right.
the obsessiveness of like monitoring them, and like I would lay with my son every night. He didn't sleep for the first 3 years by himself, and I, you know, I breastfed him till he was 3. I think all those things are good things, but it was really taxing on my body. Like I could have taken a break, right?
Mm.
But like
Yeah.
those, are, those weren't
Um,
things that I allowed myself. I didn't allow myself breaks.
right. And that was
We
just
didn't have
because,
family in town or anybody who could help.
and that like obsessiveness, what was the worry? If, I mean, I guess it probably wasn't even a thought in your mind of,
Mm.
well, if I just go out and do something tonight, like what was your concern? Like, was there a concern there, or was just your mode was just to be that way, like almost
My mode is
unthinkingly?
to be
Yeah.
that way. I'm
Right.
obsessive like I was in my eating disorder. I was
Yeah.
obsessive about exercise. I'm obsessive about the work I do now. I'm obsessive. I just have that mentality that like once it's sort of in my head, I'm like
Yeah.
I'm just like it's turning the gears. I'm just thinking about it all the time. So
And okay, and so then, but interestingly enough, well, I guess we sort of found like the caveat to that was, the way you sort of overcome the learning disability was to actually not obsess over it, or to like
yeah,
count, was to
yeah.
count, well, you counter obsessed, I guess.
I was
um
stubborn about it. I was like,
yeah.
I'm not gonna let
Right.
anything stop me, right?
Right, you did. Yeah,
So
you did like an anti obsession.
yeah,
So then,
well, I think you said it more. I dissociated from
right.
myself. Yeah, I wanted to be someone different. I wanted to be someone different than who I was.
Yeah.
So that's why I really respected and admired the literary community, and I wanted to do that, even though I knew that I wasn't good at it.
Ah, okay. Well,
Yeah,
I guess that does make sense.
yeah.
it's the Clark Kent to Superman type of mentality.
Yeah, sort of the underdog. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why people love it. So, well, we could talk about the writing. I wanted to. Oh yeah, um, how before we get into the writing, I guess with your obsessive based compulsions,
Mm-hmm.
you now have this sort of chronic fatigue thing thrust at
Mm-hmm.
you,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit nebulous and a little bit confusing, and definitely not the happiest thing. Like, how do you deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did you process
Um,
that?
so that took years. I mean, I've had chronic fatigue for since I was 26 and
Hmm.
ongoing since I was 30, and I'm 43 now. So it took years, and it wasn't something that just appeared one day and I was like, oh, I get it now. Like, I know how to deal with this physical limitation. It's a constant day to day reckoning with myself. I have to be able to say to myself, I have to change my thinking,
Yeah.
basically. And so changing your thinking doesn't come, if you've been thinking one way for so long, changing that is extremely difficult. And so every single day I have to, what's been helpful for me is to find like simple things I can say to myself, like, that's not true, those thoughts aren't true. And that's what helps me, because if I wake up and I think I'm fat, or I think I'm stupid, or I think I'm something, I can then counter that with, that's my anxiety talking, or that's not the truth. And it helped me to have these very simple, quick little phrases to say to myself when I was
Like a karate chop on the.
yeah.
Yeah.
So analyzing it to death was not helpful for me. So
Yeah.
having, yeah.
I remember at a point where I was like feeling extreme anxiety. Also, I've always been a bad sleeper because I think I've had similar type mindsets as maybe a lot of crazy creative type people have, which is
Mm-hmm.
you always have like something on your mind that's burning. So the second you wake up, you're up,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and this that she was like a sleep doctor. She told me about mindfulness, which of course I had like heard of at this point. I was an adult,
Mm-hmm.
but I never really read or looked into it. And so I read, even just one chapter from one of the guys who's big in it, John Kabat-Zinn, and it it was kind of talking in a similar way of what you're saying, which is being aware that you're having these thoughts,
Yeah.
but then not necessarily immediately attaching the emotional interpretation or the emotional extremes that can come from the potential of these thoughts, and
Mm-hmm.
I honestly suffer with it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difficult thing for me to deal with, but it
Yeah.
is something to be aware of, and it seems like what you're talking about, which I think is cool.
Mm-hmm.
um so you managed to do that, and then so when did you start the writing part?
Well, I got my MFA. Well, okay, so let me
Yeah,
start.
before.
Okay, I did go to undergrad and got my degree in literature and creative writing. And I was actually really bad at creative writing. I just was bad at it because I didn't read, and I was like, there. I didn't
Right.
have a real talent for it, but I loved it. And then
But what did you love about it? Like, why would you get a
emotion,
degree?
the emotion of it. I mean, and also, so I grew up, my family is a very literary family. Like my grandfather, I grew up with my grandfather and my grandmother and my mom mostly, and they were reading all the time. My grandfather, for my 19th birthday, gave me a collection of the great books, and like I started reading just a lot then. And I was always sort of an introvert, and so it just sort of I had grown up. My grandfather used to teach me how to write poems when I was like
Okay.
6 or 7, and like we would like he helped me memorize Shakespeare and stuff. Like he wasn't like your typical like, oh, let's play a game of hide and seek or whatever. He's like, let's
Right.
go down to my office. And yeah. I'm plugging in my computer. He's like,
Okay.
let's go down to my office and like read some poems, or like, do you know about this art concept? You know, like he was like, and he would talk
Cool.
to me about things that were like way more advanced than ever I could ever. He like taught my sister French, and
Oh,
he was a
cool.
really cool guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so that was I felt like he was the most amazing person in the world. And if I could at all model him in any way, that would be, I would be successful as a human being. And he would tell me, you know, like, I think you're like the special one, Ginna, like out of your brother and sister, like you're the one who's gonna, you know, be something and make something. And he loved that I was sensitive and emotional, and like that I liked art.
That's
And so
amazing.
that's why I like glommed onto that. Like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do.
Right. It's also always interesting. Like there's almost always someone or something that comes up where it like gives you that reminder, that gives you that model or that mentor person.
Yeah, and my mom was that person too. She's an
Yeah.
artist, and she would be like, "Do
Wow.
what your her art her thing was always do what your heart desires." You
Right.
know, like,
Cool.
you
Well,
go for
now,
your
yeah, the context now makes so much sense of now that I know you.
yeah.
But no, they sound great. Okay, so you pursued that, and yeah, I mean, again, I've known you to sort of go up and down
hmm
with your, we'll call it diagnosis, but I've
Yeah.
also always, every time we speak, you've been very positive, and so
hmm
what I like to focus on is, and you've mentioned it somewhat, but how do you use your writing and what you're doing now to kind of reinforce those things, and is there like a bigger takeaway that you have for the
hmm
folks listening?
So I think I use writing or creating art in any way as a way to express myself, and for me that's key. I mean, I really, being that emotional and sensitive person that I am, I have to have that outlet. If I don't, I can't function as well in the world. And so writing seemed natural. I recently have gotten into painting, and I really love doing that too. And so all of those things give me a, a, a sense of my inner personal emotional world, which is a really big part of who I am. And I hadn't had a place in the world to sort of represent that. And so now that I have that, feels like this amazingly huge weight is off of my shoulders. Like I can be who I am. I can be, you know, the emotional, sensitive person that I didn't feel was worthy. And then I can be in the world as an artist. Like that was what gave me, I hate the word purpose, but like it gave me a sense that I was going to be okay. Because before then, there was not this sense that I would ever be okay. I just thought
Hmm.
I would always be sick, always. I was sure. There was
Hmm.
no doubt in my mind I would always be sick. So the writing and the art give me that way to sort of not be in that sick place. Yeah.
Wow. And then, and to me, like an important thing that I always like to at least ask about is, now that you've gone through it, you've found ways to cope and for yourself. Is there for you, as either an artist or just a human being, a way that you then bring that to others as well? Like, because to me, I find one of the best ways to deal with my own crap in life is by trying to help other people whenever I can in some way. So
Mm-hmm.
teaching helps, and even
Yes. Okay. So
um,
yeah, teaching for me as well. I'm a teacher. I teach young kids. I teach mainly just first, second, third grade.
wow.
Um, I love being around kids. I love little kids, especially. So in that sense, yes, that's where I bring. That's where I feel like I am helping, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, great.
and yeah. But like, as far as helping people with my art, I'm still really shy about my art. Like, I'm still really like, oh, I don't know if I want to be in the world with my art yet. Like, if I'm making it, I love sharing. I like being able to be with other artists, but I haven't reached a point. I think COVID made it even harder because my book came out right when COVID came. And so all the events that I had planned for myself were canceled. And I was like, oh, phew, I don't have to do anything. Okay, I won't do anything. Yeah.
Well,
But, like, yeah. So,
well, you brought up a good segue, because, you know, we're always doing a little shout outs for sponsorship, you know, whether it's for merch
yeah.
or for art. Our good friend David Babani, who painted that, we can always feature any artist's art in the background, whether you want to sell it or just have your name out there.
Yeah.
So we've got a big wall here and the big wall in our podcast studio that we also do our local ones in. So if you want to feature your art, Dramatically Triumphant's the place to do it. Well, great. Thank you for joining us, Ginna. It was awesome to talk to you. And I don't know. I've always found your ability to like be both positive and real through like every stage of life, and be very, you know, open to ideas and people. Is just a difficult thing to do in general. But when you're also, I think, going through your own like physical ailments every day, and you're literally tired, more tired than the average person every day. It's amazing. And, you know, I hope that people take something from it. The last thing I say is, if there is like a, I like to kind of promote two things at the end. One is, you know, what you're working on. So I know that you do have a book. And then if there's like a cause or a charity or a nonprofit that is important to you, you know, we'll put a link for each episode for each guest's like sort of you know, thing. So tell us a little bit about your, you know, your current work. You can you can promote yourself. It's the internet. And then you know, if there's something that you feel passionate that we should be supporting, we'll do it.
So my book is a book of poems called Everything Has Been Asking for Mercy, and it's about what everything I've been talking about today. And so it's published by Finishing Line Press. And then as far as organization that
where is it available online?
Oh, it's available on their website, or you can contact me directly. I have a whole bunch of copies that I so, yeah.
Okay, so we'll put links. We'll put the direct links or whatever. We'll figure it out. Okay, excellent.
And I can't think of a specific cause that I'm particularly tied to.
It doesn't have to be the thing you're dying for, but if there's one that you think might be worth it, or you can, we'll talk offline and we'll put a link to it either way.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably be with education, since I'm a teacher, and I just need to, I don't know exactly where I would want that to go, but yeah.
All right, well, we'll find a good one. Okay. All right, well then, thanks again for joining us, Ginna. Another great episode of Traumatically Triumphant. If you want to sponsor us, put us back in the Pink Cloud Studios, even for our remote episodes, we'll be happy to take it. And if you want to put your art up there, put your art. If you've got a great story, go on to traumaticallytriumphant.com and reach out to us. Thank you, Ginna. Talk to you later.